You're watching Hoedown History, where we explore the rich history and legends of America's old time and bluegrass music.
How about doing the little tune called the Blackberry Blossom? That's a good one. How about that one?
Here's a tune with a very convoluted history that's surrounded by much debate and legend. First off the bat, I should mention that there are two versions of Blackberry Blossom that are common today. First, there's the popular bluegrass version, made famous by Bill Keith and his melodic banjo. And then there's another version, more common in old-time sessions, which is better known as Garfield's Blackberry Blossom. And there is some debate on whether these two versions of Blackberry Blossom may or may not be related. But regardless of whether they are or not, it's worth a journey to explore. So let's just dive in. You're listening to a version of Blackberry Blossom by this man, Fiddling Arthur Smith. Smith was born on April 10, 1898, in Humphreys County, Tennessee. His father died when he was only a young boy and had to leave school at 5th grade to help work on the family farm. There is some debate to where Smith learned to fiddle, but the Smith family used to recall that when he was young, before he was able to hold the fiddle properly, he used to place it on the floor in an upright position, kind of like a cello. But he kept at it and eventually got good enough to begin playing at local dances with other local musicians. One of those musicians, a local guitarist, turned out to be a girl by the name of Nettie. And Arthur would marry that girl when he was just 16 years old, and Nettie was just 14. They continued to live in a little house on his mother's farm and play for the occasional dance. Now, Smith never actually owned a real fiddle at this time. It's not clear whether he just borrowed one or played a homemade version, but Nettie recalled actually buying Arthur's first fiddle off a neighbor after selling some of her chickens. And once he had his own proper fiddle, he was determined to work on it more seriously than before. And he got pretty good enough to eventually land a spot on the Grand Ole Opry in 1927. Sounds like a great break for a musician today, but regardless of Smith's popularity on the Opry, the pay was hardly enough to support a growing family, as he was only paid just about $5 a show, and so Smith continued working his day job for the railroad company. Now, one of those songs he featured on the Grand Ole Opry was Blackberry Blossom, and it would go on to be one of his most popular pieces, which brings us to the name of this tune. And this one has more theories than, well, blossoms on a blackberry bush. But I should probably share this one, which is from the account of Arthur Smith's daughter. She recounts that in 1931 her father had started working on this song, but he didn't have a name for it. So later on in that year he began playing it on the air. And since he still didn't have a title for it, the radio station decided to have a contest to name it, and offered a $5 prize to the person who submitted the best name. Well, he got so many letters from fans of the tune that the mailman had to deliver them all in a big cardboard box. And of course, Smith eventually picked the winning title of Blackberry Blossom. The submission came from a woman in Arkansas, who named it because it was that time of year in March when all the blackberry blossoms came out. Well, that's one theory on the name, and I'll share another one later. Now, fast forward a little to 1935, when a popular band at the time called the Delmore Brothers needed a fiddler. Having jammed with Smith at hotels in the after hours, the Delmores got the idea of recording their next album with Smith. They promised that if he helped them on their next record, they would help Smith make some recordings of his own, which he had never done before. And the brothers had an upcoming recording session in New Orleans, so they wrote to the recording company to give Smith an audition as well. The record company agreed as long as Smith knew he had to pay for his own travel and expenses. Well, it wasn't too much of a burden because Smith had a free pass on the railroad because he worked as a lineman. But that didn't even matter, because when the man in charge of the studio finally heard Smith play, he was shocked, and the company paid for all of his expenses, both ways. The studio was located in an old building facing an alleyway, and all day long the recording session was interrupted by heavy trucks that caused the delicate recording equipment to vibrate. And after the Delmores recorded their session, Smith recorded his own with the brothers accompanying him. He recorded 8 sides in just 2 hours, getting almost all of them right on the first take. One of the Delmores recounts, "He played a lot louder than we did, and with our 2 guitars, we could compete with the trucks pretty good." And of course, included on one of those sides was Smith's recording of Blackberry Blossom, which went on to be one of his most famous tunes ever. Now let's fast forward to the 1950s, when Smith saw a musical world that had changed drastically. The new rockabilly and rhythm and blues sounds had taken over as the music of choice for rural listeners. This was a pretty dark time for lovers of old-time fiddle music, and it looked to Smith that, well, his kind of music would just be a thing of the past. But thankfully, there would be a new outlet for his energies as bluegrass music started to move into high gear. Enter this duo, Flat and Scruggs. By 1957, this band was making more personal appearances on the Grand Ole Opry than any other Opry act. Now, Smith jammed a lot with Earl Scruggs, and on at least one occasion, Earl recorded a home tape of himself and Smith playing Smith's repertoire of old-time fiddle tunes. Now, this tape would have a life of its own, and it would be circulated underground for many years. And eventually, this tape would wind up in the hands of the banjo player, Bill Keith. Keith, who played a melodic style of banjo, could play fiddle tunes, basically note for note, which was a novel thing for a bluegrass banjo player at the time. And it was from this underground tape that he learned to play Blackberry Blossom. And he would later record his bluegrass version of this tune with Kenny Baker in 1965. And it was Keith's version that would make the song a bluegrass standard. Numerous other bluegrass bands would go on to record this tune, probably most famously with Tony Rice, when he recorded an influential version of the tune on the album Manzanita. So that's how the tune became a bluegrass standard. But are we to take Smith at his word that he just came up with the tune on his own? And this is where things get a bit hairy. Because, as many of my old-time listeners know, there is another version of Blackberry Blossom that sounds a bit different. And there is debate on whether Smith copied this older version of Blackberry Blossom or composed it himself. The older version is usually referred to as Garfield's Blackberry Blossom. And those who think the two tunes are related suggest that Smith may have learned this older version of the tune from the Kentucky fiddler Dick Burnett. This is Burnett's recording of what he called Blackberry Blossoms, which was recorded 5 years prior to Smith's recording in 1930. Some have suggested that it is probable that Arthur Smith heard this recording, or maybe heard Burnett playing the tune in person, and used that basic melodic contour to concoct a newer version, which he recorded in that old building with the Delmores in 1935. Okay, so if we dive a little deeper, we should ask, where did Burnett learn this tune? You're listening to a timeless homemade recording of Garfield's Blackberry Blossom by the blind fiddler from West Virginia, Ed Haley. The story goes that Dick Burnett had learned Blackberry Blossom from Bob Johnson of Kentucky, who in turn had learned it from Ed Haley. You'll notice that the tune has quite a different feel and melody to the two previous versions. And those who deny that the tunes are related note the fact that Smith played his version in G major, but Garfield's Blackberry Blossom is played in the Dorian mode. And I guess we shouldn't just end with Haley, because there's more. Where did Haley learn this tune? Well, that brings us to the end of our journey. This is fiddling Ed Morrison, whose father, Christian Morrison, allegedly learned Blackberry Blossom from a colonel who used to whistle this melody during the Civil War while on campaign in Kentucky. The name of that man was Colonel James A. Garfield, who would go on to be general and then the 20th President of the United States. Here's a recording of Morrison's version of Blackberry Blossom from 1934, which was done for the Library of Congress, and it's simply marvelous.
This tune was learned from General Garfield by my father during the Civil War, as he whistled it all the time on his march up Big Sandy River to Middle Creek.
Now, many tales have been told about how this tune got associated with Garfield, and a similar tale also states that the tune goes back to Garfield, who, on a march up the Big Sandy River during the Civil War, named the tune himself after spitting tobacco juice onto a blackberry patch that was in full blossom. So while I couldn't locate a recording of Garfield's whistling track to play for you guys, I should mention that many music historians have suggested that the source of Blackberry Blossom may have come from overseas. The melody is familiar to the Irish tradition, and documented evidence in Ireland does turn up that dates back as far as 1850, if not earlier. The song can be found in the mid-19th century music manuscripts of County Court cleric Canon James Goodman. His music collection was not published in his lifetime, but in all, his collections numbered over 2,000 tunes, annotated in both Irish and English. And found in Volume 3, page 111, is the music for the song Blackberry Blossom. And I always thought the tune sounded Irish, even before I started researching this song. And I'll play an old Irish version by Dan Sullivan's Shamrock Band, so you can hear how the tune may have originally sounded. Okay, before I leave you guys, I have to share one more version of Blackberry Blossom, which I'll link in the end screen. It's one of my favorite music videos of all time. It's a more recent version of the tune by a band called the Wildmans, which was recorded at Floyd Fest on some type of old bus. And I play this once for my kids, just to prove to them that old-time music can be just as fun, exciting, and cool as any modern-day rock band. And if you're like me, you'll find yourself cranking the volume way up on this one. Well, that's all I got on Blackberry Blossom. I hope you enjoyed the video, and once again, folks, thanks for listening.